You know that feeling when you scroll through social media and see your ex smiling, traveling, maybe even dating someone new, and suddenly your heart sinks. You start thinking, wow, they've really moved on, and I'm the one still stuck. But let's get real for a second. What you're seeing is not always what it seems. Avoidant people are masters of emotional disguise. They don't move on, they distract themselves. What looks like peace is often avoidance dressed up as progress. Here's what's actually happening behind that calm facade. When an avoidant ex leaves, they don't process their emotions, they bury them. They tell themselves they're fine, they convince themselves they didn't care that much, and they run into new experiences, people, or hobbies just to keep busy enough not to feel the loss. But deep down, the silence they create is their way of managing pain, not healing it. Meanwhile, you, yes, you, the one still feeling the ache, you're doing the hard work. You're facing the silence, sitting in the discomfort, and learning what it means to love someone without losing yourself. That's not weakness, that's growth, because true healing doesn't happen when you distract yourself, it happens when you reflect. An avoidant ex might seem cold, detached, or indifferent, but remember, emotional avoidance is a protection mechanism. They fear intimacy as much as they crave it, and when the relationship ends, they protect themselves by shutting off emotionally. But avoidance doesn't equal peace, it equals delay. The heartbreak they avoid today is the loneliness they'll feel tomorrow. So, the next time you think they've forgotten me, remind yourself, they haven't moved on, they've paused their healing, and while they're running from their feelings, you're rebuilding your strength. You're not behind, you're ahead, because moving on isn't about how fast you replace someone. It's about how deeply you rediscover yourself. One day, maybe months or years from now, your avoidant ex might think about you. When they're alone, when the distractions fade, when the silence gets too loud. And they'll realize you were the one who stayed present, the one who loved deeply, the one who faced what they ran from. But by then, you'll have outgrown the need for their validation. Because you'll have learned the most powerful truth of all. Closure doesn't come from someone returning. It comes from you deciding you deserve better. When you see your avoidant ex looking happy, confident, or carefree, it's easy to believe they've truly moved on. You start to question yourself asterisk. How can they be fine while I'm still hurting? Asterisk, but the truth is, avoidant people don't move on. They distract themselves. They don't dive deep into their emotions. They skim the surface of them. What looks like healing is often just an elaborate performance designed to convince both you and themselves that they're okay. But beneath that calm, composed exterior lies a storm of unresolved feelings they don't want to face. An avoidant person has spent most of their emotional life running from discomfort. They don't know how to sit with pain, vulnerability, or uncertainty, so they push it away. When a relationship ends, instead of grieving, they jump into distractions, new hobbies, work, parties, travel, sometimes even a rebound relationship. These distractions act as emotional painkillers. They numb the ache just enough for them to feel functional. But this numbness doesn't equal healing. It's avoidance, and avoidance has an expiration date. You might think their life looks perfect now. Maybe they're posting photos with friends, or they seem to be thriving without you. But those snapshots don't tell the real story. They show what they want the world to see, not what they're actually feeling. Deep down, an avoidant ex might be struggling with guilt, confusion, or emotional emptiness. They might feel relief at first because they've escaped the vulnerability that relationships demand, but that relief eventually turns hollow. The pain they buried doesn't disappear, it waits. And eventually, it resurfaces in unexpected ways: sleepless nights, sudden waves of nostalgia, or a deep sense of loneliness that no distraction can fix. Avoidant people are experts at convincing themselves they don't care. They rewrite the story in their heads to protect their ego. Asterisk, it wasn't meant to be. I wasn't ready. Asterisk or asterisk, they were too emotional. Asterisk, these self-soothing statements keep them from facing the truth. that they lost someone who cared for them deeply. But emotional avoidance doesn't eliminate grief, it postpones it. The feelings they repress today become the baggage they carry into their next relationship. The fear they never confront keeps them repeating the same emotional cycle over and over. Meanwhile, the person who was left behind, the one feeling the pain, the confusion, the emptiness, is actually doing the real work, because pain, as uncomfortable as it is, forces you to grow. While your avoidant ex is busy avoiding their emotions, you're learning how to process yours. You're sitting in the discomfort they refuse to face, which means you're building emotional strength they don't yet have. So when you think they've moved on and you haven't, remind yourself you're not behind. You're just healing in a way that lasts. Avoidant exes don't move forward, they move sideways. They change scenery but not patterns. They seek peace without doing the work that creates it. But peace isn't found in distraction, it's found in honesty. And until they face the truth of what they feel, no amount of pretending will set them free. True healing doesn't happen when you fill your days with noise. It happens when you learn to sit in the silence and face what hurts. Most people think that moving on means staying busy, meeting new people, and keeping their mind off the past. But that's not healing. That's avoidance dressed up as productivity. Healing begins when you stop running from your emotions and start understanding them. Reflection is the process that turns pain into wisdom, while distraction only delays that transformation. When a relationship ends, your world shifts. Suddenly, there's a void where someone used to be, a silence where there was once laughter, a stillness where there was once connection. It's tempting to fill that space with anything that keeps your mind off the ache. Endless scrolling, overworking, talking to someone new, or pretending you're fine. But what if you stopped trying to escape that emptiness and started listening to it? Because within that discomfort lies the truth of who you are, what you need, and what you deserve. Reflection isn't about overthinking, it's about understanding. It's about asking yourself, what did this relationship teach me? What patterns do I keep repeating? What part of me still needs healing? Avoidant people often run from these questions because they don't like the answers. Reflection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels unsafe to those who fear emotional exposure. That's why they stay on the surface, keeping themselves busy, pretending they're unaffected, and mistaking numbness for peace. But you can't truly move on until you've made peace with what happened. And peace comes from facing your emotions, not avoiding them. Every emotion you avoid becomes a wound that stays open, quietly shaping your choices and your future relationships. When you take time to reflect, you start to recognize your own emotional patterns. Maybe you realize how much you gave without receiving enough in return. Maybe you see the ways you ignored your own needs to keep the peace. Or maybe you finally understand that your worth was never tied to how much someone else could love you. That awareness doesn't come from distraction, it comes from honesty. Reflection allows you to take back control, not of what happened, but of what it means for you now. Healing through reflection also means showing yourself compassion. It's easy to judge yourself for missing someone who hurt you or for still feeling sad months later. But emotions don't follow a schedule. You can't rush grief. When you choose reflection, you give yourself permission to heal at your own pace. You stop trying to win the breakup and start focusing on becoming whole again. And that's the difference between distraction and transformation. One keeps you in the same emotional cycle, while the other frees you from it. So when you catch yourself searching for ways to stay busy, pause. Ask yourself, am I distracting myself from my pain, or am I learning from it? Because the moment you start reflecting, you stop being controlled by the past and start creating a future built on self-awareness, strength, and genuine peace. Avoidance is often mistaken for strength because it looks like control. When someone seems calm, composed, and detached after a breakup, it's easy to assume they're emotionally strong. but what appears to be strength is often just fear wearing a mask. Avoidance is not the absence of emotion, it's the suppression of it. It's a defense mechanism built over years of learning that vulnerability leads to pain. So when an avoidant person pulls away, shuts down, or seems indifferent, they're not being brave. They're protecting themselves from the fear of being hurt again. At the heart of avoidance lies a deep fear of intimacy. People who struggle with avoidance often grew up believing that closeness comes with risk of rejection, judgment, or loss. So they learn to keep their emotions under control and their walls high. When a relationship starts to get emotionally deep, their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to retreat. They distance themselves not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. To them, love feels like a trap where they might lose their independence or be forced to confront parts of themselves they'd rather ignore. When an avoidant ex walks away, it's rarely because they've stopped feeling. In fact, it's often because they've started feeling too much. The intensity of connection triggers their fears of vulnerability, so they run before those emotions can take hold. They convince themselves that detachment is safer than intimacy, and that shutting off their feelings is better than risking heartbreak. But the irony is, in trying to protect themselves from pain, they end up creating more of it. The loneliness that comes from emotional distance is often far greater than the pain they were trying to avoid in the first place. Avoidance may look like emotional maturity from the outside, staying calm, not crying, moving on quickly, but it's actually emotional fear. It's the inability to sit with discomfort and to trust that vulnerability won't destroy them. Emotional strength isn't about staying untouched by pain. It's about facing it with courage. The avoidant person doesn't lack emotion. They lack trust in their ability to handle emotion. They see feelings as threats instead of guides, and because of that, they never give themselves the chance to experience the full depth of love or the full growth that comes with heartbreak. True strength lies in the willingness to feel. It's found in those who can admit when they're hurt, who can communicate instead of withdrawing, and who can stay when things get uncomfortable. Avoidant people often admire these qualities in others, but struggle to embody them themselves. They think they're protecting their peace by staying detached, but real peace doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from acceptance. Until they face the fear that drives their distance, they'll keep repeating the same cycle: connection, discomfort, withdrawal, and regret. Avoidance isn't power, it's paralysis. It stops people from experiencing real connection and from healing old wounds. The walls they build to feel safe eventually become the prison that keeps them lonely. And the moment they learn to see vulnerability not as weakness, but as strength, that's when true emotional freedom begins. It's easy to look at your avoidant ex and think they're ahead of you. They seem calm, detached, and completely unaffected, while you're the one still feeling everything. You're crying, replaying memories, questioning your worth, and wondering how they manage to move on so easily. But here's the truth: they're not ahead of you, they're stuck. The difference is that your pain is visible and theirs is buried. Healing isn't measured by how quickly someone moves on, it's measured by how deeply they grow, and while you're confronting your emotions, they're postponing theirs. When someone avoids their feelings, they press pause on their emotional development. They don't deal with the loss, they simply run from it. That might make them appear strong or indifferent, but really, it keeps them from evolving. Growth requires facing what hurts, and avoidance blocks that process. Every time an avoidant ex distracts themselves or shuts down, they're delaying their healing. They might look like they've moved forward, but emotionally, they're frozen in the same place where the relationship ended. You, on the other hand, are moving through the pains, slowly, painfully, but truthfully. That's progress. Healing isn't supposed to be glamorous. It's raw, messy, and uncomfortable. But every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of reflection is a step toward becoming more emotionally mature. When you allow yourself to feel, you're building resilience. You're learning how to process your emotions instead of running from them. That's something your avoidant ex hasn't yet learned how to do. And that's why, even if it doesn't feel like it, you're the one growing stronger. The strength that comes from emotional honesty lasts far longer than the illusion of control that comes from avoidance. Avoidant people often confuse stillness with peace. They think that by staying detached, they're maintaining balance, but peace doesn't come from ignoring pain, it comes from processing it. What they call calmness is actually emotional shutdown. They've numbed themselves so they don't have to face the discomfort of loss. But emotions don't just disappear because they are ignored. They linger, waiting for a quiet moment to resurface. One day, when the distractions fade and the loneliness sets in, they'll feel what you're feeling now. Only by then, you'll have moved past it. You're not behind, you're ahead because you're choosing the harder path, the one that leads to genuine healing. Every time you reflect, cry, journal, or talk through your pain, you're building a foundation of self-awareness and emotional strength. You're learning what love should feel like, what boundaries you need, and how to protect your peace. You're not stuck in the past, you're learning from it. The avoidant ex is stuck in denial, replaying the same emotional loop, waiting for time to do what courage should. Real progress isn't about pretending not to care. It's about allowing yourself to care and still choosing to grow from it. So while they're pressing pause on their healing, you're pressing play on your growth. You're doing the inner work that leads to freedom, and that's something no distraction can ever replace. Closure is something everyone searches for after a breakup. We crave that final conversation, that explanation, that moment when everything suddenly makes sense. But the hard truth is, closure doesn't come from someone else, it comes from within. It's not about hearing your ex say they miss you, regret leaving, or finally understand your worth. It's about you realizing that your value was never dependent on their ability to see it. When you stop waiting for someone else to make peace with what happened, you finally take back your power. That's when real healing begins. We often convince ourselves that if our ex reached out, if they apologized, or if they admitted they made a mistake, we'd finally be able to move on. But what we're really doing is giving them control over our healing. We're waiting for permission to feel at peace. The problem is, avoidant exes rarely give that closure. They avoid emotional conversations the same way they avoid vulnerability. They might never explain why they left, or what went wrong, or how they truly felt. And even if they did, it wouldn't change the deeper truth. That closure is not something you receive, it's something you decide. Real closure comes the moment you stop chasing answers that won't change the outcome. It comes when you understand that silence is also an answer, and distance is a form of communication. When someone leaves and doesn't return, that's all the clarity you need. The absence of effort is the message. And instead of trying to decode it, your job is to accept it and move forward. Acceptance doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop allowing their choices to define your peace. Taking your power back means shifting your focus from why they did what they did to what you're going to do now. It means turning your pain into purpose. Every time you choose not to text them, not to check their social media, not to chase answers, you're teaching yourself self-respect. You're reminding yourself that you deserve clarity, effort, and consistency, and you won't settle for less. That mindset is what transforms heartbreak into growth. The most empowering part of closure is realizing that you don't need it from anyone else. You can give it to yourself. You can write the ending that honors your worth even if they never apologized. You can decide that the story doesn't end with rejection, but with rediscovery. You can turn what felt like loss into liberation. Because the goal isn't to get them back, it's to get yourself back. When you reach that point, you'll notice something powerful. Their opinion no longer holds weight. Whether they regret leaving or not becomes irrelevant. You no longer need them to validate your pain or your progress. You'll stop wondering what they're doing and start focusing on who you're becoming. That's real closure, not from their words, but from your decision to move forward with strength, dignity, and self-worth. In the end, remember that what looks like strength in others is often just avoidance, and what feels like weakness in you is actually growth. Healing isn't about who moves on first, it's about who grows deeper, wiser, and more self-aware through the pain. So stop searching for closure in someone who ran from their own emotions. Find it in the way you've learned to face yours. You're not behind, you're evolving. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for choosing to rise above the illusion of moving on. To embrace the truth of healing and self-worth.